Ladies and gentlemen, especially dear Jack Janes, I'm always very happy to be here, and I'm very pleased that the issue of central banking is attracting a much bigger crowd than it used to be, and as this is a very important issue, and I may also, in addition to what Benoit just said, I'm glad to be here not only because I have a German passport, but also because I have a US passport. So I feel very much represented by the title of this organization. Now, the events of the past 5 years have called into question many and a lot of the assumptions that were the foundations of our monetary and financial system. But while we think it's necessary to draw the right conclusions from the crisis we're in since 2007, 2008, we should not discard the lessons we have learned from previous crises, because we think they remain equally valid. Now, when I talk about the role of central banks, the cautious role of central banks, I may add, in spurring economic growth, this is what we think such a lesson we learned the hard way in the 70s and actually in the 80s. Some central banks tried to foster economic growth by reducing interest rates quite considerably, even at the price of significantly higher inflation rates. Now, in contrast, inflation rates in countries with independent central banks, and that's something Benoit also mentioned, with independent central banks focused on delivering price stability, were comparatively low in these years. If I look at the average inflation rate from 1973 to 1988, average inflation in Germany stood at 3.4%, but it reached 8.2% in France, 12.5% in Italy, and 12.4% in Spain. Now, the important point I'd like to make here is that lower inflation did not come at the expense of lower growth. It turned out that quite the opposite is true, actually. The best contribution to sustainable growth a central bank actually can make, we think, is to keep prices stable. But stable prices are not the only prerequisite for growth. A stable financial system is also, of course, very important and crucial. This is the lesson of the financial crisis we had to learn, again, the hard way. It is of utmost importance, we think, to restore and preserve confidence in the resilience of the financial system as a whole. In this process, central banks play an important role, especially when it comes to mitigating systemic risks, nowadays known as macroprudential regulation and macroprudential supervision. In keeping prices stable and contributing to a stable financial system, central banks can put in place the conditions for sustainable growth. But they cannot deliver this growth on their own. All measures the Euro system, of course including the European Central Bank, have taken so far to contain the fallout of the crisis, let me remind you of some: the reduction in interest rates to a mere 50 basis points, the decision to provide banks with quasi-unlimited liquidity, and the decision to intervene in bond markets. They only helped to stabilize output in the short term. The fundamental problems of the euro area are actually structural in nature. As such, they also require structural solutions. Precarious public finances and a restrictive credit supply of banks. And these challenges cannot be overcome by monetary policy. All that central banks can do is to buy time for governments and parliaments to consolidate budgets, time for governments and parliaments to improve the functioning of product and labor markets, and time to recapitalize banks. In safeguarding monetary and financial stability, central banks can pave the way for growth. But to actually get there, it's governments and parliaments which must go down the route of implementing the required reforms. I did not here to come and preach, so I'm here to listen and to discuss, so let me stop here. Thank you for listening.